We don't serve people like you." The words sliced through the air sharper than a blade. Jackson stood motionless at the counter, as if time itself had stopped. His coat, once a proud wool blend, was now threadbare and torn at the elbows. His boots, cracked and uneven, held memories of too many cold sidewalks. Beneath a worn-out beanie, his face was aged not by years but by life's relentlessness. His presence screamed of exhaustion, yet no one seemed to care. Chad, the cafe manager, didn't flinch. His tone was smooth, chilled like stainless steel. It was the kind of cruelty that comes from practice, not impulse. "There's a hygiene standard here. Please leave." Not a single barista behind the counter dared to move. Customers glanced briefly, their eyes flinching before snapping back to glowing screens. Discomfort was easier to ignore than confront. Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. His hand shook just slightly, betraying a mix of pride and desperation. "I just want a regular coffee. That's enough, right?" Chad didn't glance at the money. "There's a convenience store down the block," he replied, dismissive. "Try there." The bill retreated into Jackson's coat as he nodded faintly, turned, and stepped back into the cold twilight. His breath fogged briefly in the air before disappearing, just like he had. No one knew. The man they just rejected wasn't some wanderer. He was Jackson Miller, the founder of the Roast Place, a name once whispered with admiration in local circles. A man who had built warmth out of nothing, and now, outside his own creation, he stood unseen. He knew what it meant to be forgotten. Jackson's childhood had unfolded in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. 4 siblings squeezed into a corner of love and scarcity. Their mother, a warrior in a janitor's uniform, cleaned offices at night and folded laundromat shirts by day. Dinner, when there was one, was peanut butter spread thin on stiff toast. On hungrier nights, the aroma of someone else's cooking drifting from under a neighbor's door had to be enough. At 9, Jackson got his first job, delivering newspapers before school. He wrapped them in plastic and pedaled through rain and sleet until his legs burned. On weekends, he scoured alleys for bottles. 50 cents meant a sandwich, $1 meant lunch for his baby sister. His shoes were always torn. His school notebooks, hand-me-downs filled with faded names of kids who had graduated years before. But his mother made sure none of them ever felt poor. She would smile, stroke his messy hair, and whisper, "You don't need much to have worth." Those words stayed with Jackson like scripture. They guided his soul, shaped his dreams. Yet now, standing outside a place he once built with belief and battered hands, he wondered if anyone still believed them. The Roast Place started humbly. Second-hand chairs, mismatched mugs, and tables rescued from yard sales. But on the wall behind the counter, Jackson had hung a wooden sign carved by his own hands. "Coffee is meant to be shared. No polish, just truth." People didn't come for fancy foam art. They came for the comfort, the warmth of silence, a break from judgment, a place where time slowed and hearts rested. A bus driver would sip tea after a long shift. A young mother, stroller in hand, would find a moment's peace. An old man sat counting coins by the window, never asking, just being. Every free refill was a quiet affirmation. You matter, even if the world says otherwise. Jackson had believed that something as simple as a cup of coffee, placed gently in front of someone, could say, "You're not alone." But now, from across the street, Jackson saw the sign was gone, and no one seemed to miss it. Inside, a young woman with a neat ponytail and tired eyes moved behind the counter. Emma. She was quick, but not rushed. Her hands were gentle, precise. As Jackson watched, she slid a small paper bag discreetly across to an older man in a tattered coat. "Here," she whispered. "It's still good. A muffin from yesterday's batch." The man smiled, touched by her kindness. But before he could speak, Chad's voice tore through the moment. "Emma!" He stormed over, his jaw tight with fury. You're not here to give things away. That's theft. Emma froze. I don't care, he snapped. Do it again and you're done. Silence fell. Emma looked down, shrinking into herself. No one defended her. No one even looked up, except one man sitting in the corner, his face half veiled in shadow. He saw everything. He clenched his jaw. Emma, this young girl with weary kindness, was the last flicker of what the roast place used to be. Then, a man in dusty work boots stepped in, a hard hat under one arm, sweat on his collar. His voice was soft, respectful. Just a small coffee, please. Chad didn't look up. We're about to clean the kitchen. Come back in an hour. The machines were still on. The smell of espresso lingered in the air. But the man simply nodded and walked out, empty-handed, dignity intact but bruised. Minutes later, a woman in polished heels entered. Chad lit up. Miss Holloway, your latte's ready. I saved your favorite table. In the back, Emma wiped trays with mechanical movements. Nearby, a pale young barista named Sarah approached hesitantly. My daughter's sick. I need to leave early. Chad didn't blink. Either stay or don't bother coming back tomorrow, Sarah faltered. Then, with a deep breath, she tied her apron tighter and returned to her post. Across the street, Jackson sat frozen in his seat, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes filled with sorrow, not anger. He wasn't just watching a café. He was watching a place once born from dignity, now draining it from those who needed it most. And in that moment, as steam curled from a cup that wasn't his, he realized. The roast place hadn't been taken from him. It had been forgotten. In an instant, Jackson was no longer a man watching from across the street. He was 10 again. Small, shivering beside his mother inside a modest diner, her hand clasping a few crumpled bills. Her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke with gentle dignity. One bowl of soup, please. We'll share. The waiter barely glanced at the money before shaking his head, indifferent. No sharing allowed, one order per person. They walked out, empty and unseen. Outside, snow began to fall, sticking to his shoes and melting into his cuffs. That night, under a flickering hallway light, Jackson made a promise to himself, a promise more sacred than any prayer. If he ever built something, even just a tiny food cart, it would be a place where no one ever felt small. That vow was the seed that became the roast place. Not a business, but a refuge. A place where dignity came free with every cup, and kindness wasn't a policy. It was the foundation. But now, sitting silently as a stranger in the shell of what he once created, Jackson watched people being turned away with the same cold indifference that once pushed him and his mother out into a snowy night. And he wondered, had he failed? Not just the guests, but the very woman who raised him on empty stomachs and full hope. The walls looked the same. Wooden counters still reflected soft golden light. But the soul was missing. What once felt like warmth now felt like routine. People came, placed their orders, left. No connections, no glances, just transaction. His gaze drifted to where the sign had once hung. Coffee is meant to be shared. Letters he carved with blistered hands. Was that still true? Did anyone even remember it? He studied the staff. Their smiles were thin, forced. They moved like gears in a machine, efficient but lifeless. His fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table, not from anger but from something heavier. Doubt. Had his vision outgrown its own heart? Had the pursuit of expansion choked the original breath of the place? He didn't know when the change started. Maybe it hadn't happened all at once. Maybe, like rot in wood, it spread slowly, quiet, creeping, while he was too busy opening new locations to notice the one that mattered most was fading. And for the first time in years, Jackson asked himself a question that terrified him. Did I let this happen? The next morning, he returned. Same coat, same worn beanie. He blended into the city like a ghost, unseen, unheard. But this time, he didn't go inside right away. He sat on the cold bench across the street, a cheap phone with cracked edges in hand. Every 10 minutes, he observed. He didn't take names. He took patterns. Who was welcomed? Who was dismissed? Who received a smile? Who waited too long? Who never got served at all? By the third day, the trend was undeniable. The well-dressed were greeted. The rest were gently, subtly filtered out. Smiles were reserved for status. Everyone else got the bare minimum. Each day he stepped in just once, always ordered the same plain black coffee. No one remembered him. Or maybe they never looked close enough to care. But Jackson remembered every face, every reaction, every small act of judgment. Each visit raised a harder question. How far had this place drifted? And how much of that drift had his silence allowed? Then, one afternoon, he spotted something behind the counter. Tucked between invoices and schedule slips was a thin black notebook, unmarked but ominous. Chad had left it open while ranting to a new hire. Jackson, from his corner seat, watched closely. Inside, names, handwritten, accompanied by chilling notes. Too loud. Cheap clothes. Weird smell. Takes up space. Each name underlined in red. People Jackson had once served personally, now reduced to traits. To warnings. Not customers, but liabilities. Chad flipped through the pages like it was a manual. No service. Limited seating. Encourage takeout, he muttered. These people don't match our brand. Jackson felt his chest tighten. Not in surprise, but in shame. Shame that this list, this quiet cruelty, existed in a place he once dreamed would be safe for everyone. A man walked in, shirt damp with sweat. He didn't even ask for coffee, just a glass of water. Emma, ever gentle, didn't hesitate. She filled a paper cup, her voice barely above a whisper. Here you go. He nodded, grateful, and stepped back into the heat. But Chad had seen it all. He waited for the lull, then pulled Emma aside behind the sink. His voice was low and sharp. No more freebies. This is a business, not a charity. Emma didn't defend herself. Her eyes lowered. You're too emotional, Chad sneered. That kind of softness gets people fired. Jackson clenched his jaw. His hands balled into fists beneath the table. The girl who gave a thirsty stranger a cup of water now stood one act of kindness away from unemployment. And her co-workers? They didn't lift their heads. Fear had taught them silence. It started small. The senior discount sign vanished. No announcement, no notice. Then a student asked about the college rate. Chad waved him off. Not available at this location anymore. Punch cards for low-income families. Gone. Morning deals for night shift workers. Removed. One by one, the lifelines disappeared. Chad called it streamlining. We're focusing on premium service, he said. No need to attract people who only buy drip coffee. Jackson sat in his corner, the bitterness in his cup now deeper than the roast. His brand, once about belonging, was being reshaped into a filter that quietly rejected the very people it had vowed to welcome. No one protested. No one noticed. Except him. And the people who no longer walked in, who now passed the café without even glancing at the door. It was nearing 3 p.m. Rachel, an exhausted single mother, had just untied her apron. Her phone buzzed, a reminder to pick up her son from daycare. Before she could leave, Chad called out, Melissa's out sick. I need you to stay till close. Rachel's voice trembled. I can't. I have no one to watch my boy. Chad didn't blink. You want this job or not? I've got a stack of apps from people who don't complain. Rachel hesitated. Then, slowly, she retied her apron. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. The espresso machine hissed. No one said a word. Jackson saw it all, every forced smile, every shift in posture when Chad walked by. This wasn't a cafe anymore. It was survival with sugar on top. He stopped just watching. He started documenting. Phone low in his lap. Camera pointed between the salt and sugar jars. He recorded everything: photos of empty tip jars, audio clips of Chad's verbal threats, crisp and undeniable. Notes on who was welcomed, who was ignored, who was pressured, who got punished for kindness. Each night the file on his phone grew longer, and with every line, every clip, his resolve hardened. He accessed the internal system. He still had admin credentials. The reports? They didn't match the receipts. The discounts had vanished quietly, like a song fading into static. Wage records didn't match hours worked. But Jackson wasn't angry. Not yet. What coursed through him wasn't rage. It was clarity. Focus sharpened by betrayal. Something was building, not just inside the cafe's walls, but inside his chest. And soon, someone was going to learn exactly what it felt like to be seen without the filter of fear or false charm. It started with a missing deposit. One full day's cash sales had vanished from the books. Jackson cross-checked the logs, once, then again, then a third time. The internal dashboard told one story. His private records told another. Numbers didn't add up. Margins were too clean. Bonuses were listed. None of them approved. Then he found it. A hidden folder buried behind layers of subfolders, locked under an unassuming label. He cracked it open. Inside, a second set of spreadsheets. Same sales totals. But the breakdown was different. Discounts removed, labor hours slashed, profit inflated. Chad hadn't just manipulated the numbers, he'd rewritten the story. Jackson traced the lie backward. Month after month, the pattern repeated. The losses were no longer minor discrepancies. They were theft. Thousands of dollars skimmed and siphoned. Chad wasn't just cruel, he was clever. This wasn't negligence. This was embezzlement. Jackson leaned back, staring at the screen. The cafe hadn't simply drifted off course. It had been hijacked. And now a new chapter was unfolding. And this one, Jackson would write with his own hands. He opened an email flagged from a forwarded account. The subject line was sharp and polished. Expansion opportunity, premium clientele, only. The email was from Chad, sent to a private investor circle. Jackson's eyes scanned the text, each line like a fresh bruise. Chad pitched a plan to franchise the roast place nationwide. But this version? It wasn't built on inclusion. It was luxury only. No community boards, no budget-friendly deals, no charity tokens. Just sleek marble counters, velvet booths, and clientele filtered by affluence. The brand has legacy credibility, Chad wrote. But it's time to reposition. No more free refills, no more everyone's welcome messaging. This is coffee for people who belong. Jackson felt the sentence land like a punch. The idea that the very thing he built to welcome the forgotten was being sold under his name as an exclusive status symbol was more than betrayal. It was desecration. Across the room, Emma quietly slipped a muffin into a teenage boy's hand. His hoodie was torn, his eyes wary. No charge, no receipt. Just a quiet gesture of humanity. He gave a nod of gratitude before disappearing out the door. From behind the counter, Chad noticed. The next morning, a new camera appeared, mounted low, aimed directly at Emma's station. No explanation, no warning. It didn't need one. Later that day, Emma opened her locker and found a note. Second strike. Next one's your last. After that, Jackson noticed her smile changed. It still surfaced, but never reached her eyes. Her hands, once fluid and warm, moved carefully now. Her kindness hadn't died. It was just hiding behind fear. He knew the signs. He'd warned them once too. Emma wasn't just at risk. She was being targeted, punished for doing what the roast place was built to celebrate, offering care in a world that too often demanded coldness. Jackson kept digging. Beneath a pile of payroll sheets in a locked drawer, he found a small leather notebook. Unlabeled, worn, intimate. Inside, names, every staff member listed, each with quick assessments scribbled in shorthand, easily influenced, low ambition, submissive. Then he saw it. Emma Parker, too emotional. Potential disruptor, remove within 30 days, underlined, red ink, bold. Jackson gripped the page tightly. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Chad's. He flipped through more pages. Too soft, asks too many questions, gives freebies. Beside some names were X's, already fired. This wasn't leadership. This was quiet erasure. He stared at Emma's name, not just for what it said, but for what it meant. Her kindness wasn't an inconvenience. It was a threat. And now it had a countdown. Jackson knew then, if he remained silent, he wasn't just complicit. He was a collaborator. After the lunch rush, the café hushed. Emma hummed faintly as she refilled napkin holders. Chad leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. Then, just loud enough for Jackson to hear, he muttered, "She's emotional garbage, doesn't belong in a real team." Emma froze, only for a moment. Then she turned, offered a small, practiced smile, and walked away. She didn't argue, didn't flinch. She just kept working, hands steady, back straight. But Jackson sat at the far corner and heard every syllable. His fingers gripped the ceramic mug so tightly his knuckles paled. There was no laughter to soften the blow, no customers to blur the tension, only silence. And in that silence, something cracked. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about every quiet person who had ever been crushed for daring to care. That night, the back alley was quiet. Steam curled up from Emma's cup as she stood near the bins, the end of her shift clinging to her shoulders like weight. Jackson, still hidden in plain sight, approached softly. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "After everything?" Emma looked down. A pause, then a deep breath. "My mom's sick," she whispered. "I'm her only caregiver." She hesitated again. The rest was still unsaid, but her silence spoke clearly. "Because I can't afford to lose this." Jackson didn't speak right away. He just nodded, something in his expression quietly shifting. The weight Emma carried wasn't just economic. It was emotional, generational, and invisible to those who refused to look. But Jackson saw her now, fully, and he was done watching. "This job, it pays just enough to keep the lights on," Emma murmured, the steam from her cup barely brushing her lips. Then her voice softened. She glanced back toward the café, her eyes pulling memory from walls that no longer spoke kindly. "But that's not the only reason," she added. "Years ago, when no one would hire me, this place gave me a chance. No judgment, just space to breathe." Her eyes lifted and met Jackson's, calm but glinting with something unshakably human. "I stay because someone has to remember what this place was." What it meant. Jackson said nothing. He couldn't, because in that moment, something heavy inside him shifted. He didn't see Emma as vulnerable anymore. He saw her as the last living piece of the dream he had once carved into wood with his bare, blistered hands. The last heartbeat of what the roast place was meant to be. And now she was being ground down by the very walls that once lifted her. It was nearly closing time. Most of the chairs had been flipped onto tables. The cafe lights dimmed, humming low. Emma moved slowly from table to table, wiping each surface with measured care. Her movements were methodical, but her shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion that only people who carry too much for too long can understand. Jackson sat alone in the corner, his hood low, watching. She paused at the final table, both hands resting on the cloth. Her breath caught. Then, a single tear fell from her face onto the wood. It vanished into the grain like it belonged there. She didn't wipe it. She didn't hide it. She just kept going. That image, quiet, powerful, unapologetically human, locked itself in Jackson's memory. It wasn't dramatic. It was something greater. It was real. And for Jackson, it was enough. Enough watching, enough waiting. He rose slowly, and inside his chest, one thought echoed like thunder. It's time. That night at 10:42 p.m., Jackson opened his laptop. He logged in, not as himself, but through an old, nearly forgotten admin alias connected to corporate systems. In the subject line, he typed, "Urgent staff meeting, strategic investor visit." The message was careful, professional, laced with subtle urgency, talks of potential expansion, critical investor presence, and a gentle reminder, impressions matter. He hit send. One click. Every employee at that location got it. Chad would read it first thing in the morning. He would dress sharp, take charge, control the narrative, all to impress an investor who didn't exist. Jackson shut his laptop and exhaled. Every piece of evidence he'd collected, every photo, every audio clip, every whispered conversation, was lined up. This wasn't just exposure. It was truth, wearing a mirror. And Chad had no idea who was about to walk in. The next morning, Chad stood in the back office. Sleeves rolled, tie loosened, clicking through a slideshow of buzzwords and borrowed brilliance. The new logo gleamed gold. The tables were marble white in mock-up photos. Filtered lighting, designer fixtures. Buzzwords danced across the screen. Elevated experience, premium audience, selective ambiance. One phrase sat in bold like a crown jewel. Redefining coffee culture, one class at a time. Chad smiled, pleased. He rehearsed his pitch aloud, sharp and arrogant. "In 6 months, no one walking in here will order plain black coffee. We'll raise the floor. No discounts, no freeloaders, no clutter." He paused, smirking. "No one poor will set foot in here again." He believed it. Every word. To him, luxury equaled value. Community was noise. Empathy was inefficient. Across the cafe, Emma aligned chairs without knowing she was the very thing being erased. Jackson stood nearby, listening. What had started as warmth in a paper cup was now being rebranded into exclusivity, polished rot behind designer words. But Chad couldn't see that. By 10:20 a.m., the cafe gleamed. Pastries were lined like artifacts, tables immaculate. Staff-only doors creaked open. The team stood shoulder to shoulder. No one talked. Emma crossed her arms, lip bitten. Tyler fiddled nervously with a pen cap. Rachel glanced at her watch twice in 1 minute. The air felt ready to snap. Chad paced in front of the projector, muttering, "Smile when he walks in. Stand tall. Keep it sharp." He, the investor. No one had seen him. No one had met him, but everyone feared him, except Jackson. He watched from the hallway, invisible but present. This wasn't a staff meeting. This was a countdown to the truth. At 10:30 sharp, the door opened. All eyes turned. Jackson stepped in. Same coat, same scuffed boots, same slow, deliberate walk. He didn't smile. He didn't scan the room. He walked straight to the center. Chad's face dropped, eyes flaring. "What is this? Security!" 2 baristas froze, unsure. Chad barked louder. "Get him out, now!" Jackson didn't flinch. He reached into his coat, not for a wallet, but for a single folded sheet of paper. He placed it on the counter beside the projector. Then calmly, "I don't belong." Chad stormed forward, finger raised. "You don't belong here. This is a private—" Jackson cut him off, voice still even. "Actually, I think I do." The room shifted. Whispers stirred. Emma narrowed her eyes, watching every movement. The man no one saw coming had just walked into his own storm, and he wasn't backing down. "I'm not an investor. I'm not a guest," Jackson said. "My name is Jackson Miller, and I founded the roast place." Silence swallowed the room. Chad blinked. "No, you can't be—" He looked around, searching for confirmation, something to hold on to, but the only thing he found was the truth. Emma's mouth parted in shock. Tyler's pen fell from his hand. Even the espresso machine fell silent. Jackson slowly removed his beanie. Gray hair, tired eyes, but unmistakably him. He looked around, not at the walls, but at the people. Some confused, some ashamed, some, like Emma, relieved. Then his gaze landed on Chad. "Before we talk about your future," he said, his voice quiet but sharp, "I think everyone here deserves to know what you've done." In that instant, the balance of power flipped. The room wasn't Chad's anymore. It belonged to Jackson. He opened his laptop. One click mirrored the screen to the projector. The white wall lit up. "Let's start here," he said. Slide 1, mismatched sales reports. 2 spreadsheets, 1 real, 1 doctored. Slide 2, audio. Chad's voice, crisp and clear. "Cut the cash report by $300. No one checks the drawer on Thursdays." Slide 3, internal emails. "Eliminate discounts. Poverty doesn't sell. Rebrand for people who matter." Slide 4, unauthorized bonuses, personal logs, inflated salaries, erased names. Chad's face went pale. Those aren't." Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence grow. Let the shame settle, because the worst spotlight is the one you forget someone else might turn on. Chad stepped forward, face flushed, voice cracking beneath forced confidence. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "I was under pressure. Targets, deadlines, rising costs." He gestured wildly at the glowing screen. "I wasn't stealing. I was optimizing. That's how business works now." No one moved. Emma's arms stayed crossed. Rachel's brow lifted, because now the mask was off, and the real roast was just beginning. Even Tyler, usually a silent shadow in the room, instinctively took a step away from Chad's side. Chad's voice cracked, a mix of desperation and denial. "I kept this place running while you were gone. Yeah, I made hard calls, but I did what I had to." Jackson didn't respond. He didn't have to, because everyone in that room already knew the truth. This wasn't about hard decisions. It was about greed, disguised as leadership. And when truth speaks louder than any excuse, silence becomes the loudest indictment. Jackson turned his gaze from Chad, calm, direct. "But there's one person here," he said, his voice firm but warm, "who never forgot what this cafe was built for." His eyes landed on Emma. She didn't rewrite reports. She didn't chase investors or hoard bonuses. She just showed up every day, tired, underpaid, often disrespected, and still chose kindness. Emma froze. A quiet wrapped around her, dense as reverence. Jackson stepped forward, his voice steady. "She's the reason I still recognize this place. The soul of the roast place lives in her." Emma's lips parted, but all that came was a whisper. "I was just doing what felt right." Jackson nodded gently. "And that's why you should lead it." The room drew in breath. A gasp, then soft clapping. At first tentative, then rising. Because in that moment, Emma wasn't just a barista anymore. She was the heartbeat of everything that mattered. Jackson stepped forward, voice unwavering. "As of today," he said, "Emma Parker is the new general manager of the roast place." There was stillness, and then applause cracked open like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Emma stood frozen, eyes wide, lips parted. Rachel pulled her into a hug. Tyler punched the air in triumph. Even Lena, quiet for so long, smiled through glassy eyes. Chad? He stood motionless, shoulders sagging, sweat dampening his collar. The room no longer faced him. They didn't need to. The moment Jackson spoke, they'd stopped listening to fear and started listening to truth. Chad didn't argue. He couldn't. Because what crumbled wasn't just his position. It was the illusion that power always wears a loud voice. Emma turned to Jackson, her voice trembling. "Are you sure?" He smiled, soft, steady. "I've never been more sure of anything." Just then, the cafe door opened with a gentle chime. 2 officers stepped inside, calm, composed. "Chad Whitmore?" one asked. He stiffened. "Yeah. What is this?" Jackson stepped forward, handing the officer a folder. "Financial fraud, payroll manipulation, attempted unauthorized sale of corporate assets. It's all documented." Chad turned red, then pale. "This is insane! I'm the manager! I'll sue!" The officer stepped closer. "You have the right to remain silent." Cuffs clicked into place. Chad flinched, but no one else did. Not a word of protest, not a flicker of sympathy. He looked back once, but found no eyes waiting for him. They were all turned toward Emma. Justice didn't come with trumpets. It came in quiet, certain steps, and it arrived exactly on time. The silence that followed didn't last long. Lena stepped forward, voice shaking but determined. "He made us pay for broken dishes out of our checks, docked hours if we used the bathroom, forced Rachel to close alone after 12-hour shifts." Others nodded. Tyler added, "He canceled tips if we didn't hit his sales goals." Another voice from the back, "He said sick days made us look weak." Emma stood at the center, not overwhelmed by the voices, but steadied by them. This wasn't chaos. It was clarity. For the first time, they weren't whispering in break rooms. They were standing with each other. Jackson watched from the edge of the room. For the first time in years, the cafe didn't feel like a burden. It felt like breath. Near the counter, no one shouted orders. No one rushed. People moved like they belonged, like they mattered. Jackson looked around slowly. Lena still clutching her apron, Rachel wiping her eyes. Tyler exhaling like he'd held his breath for months. "This cafe," Jackson said softly, "was never meant to be built for profit first. It was meant to welcome, to warm, to hold space for people who had none." He paused. "And today, it becomes that place again." Emma stood beside him, unsure, but ready. He nodded to her gently. She lowered her head. Not in shyness, but in respect, in acceptance of both the weight and the honor. No roaring cheers, no grand music, just hands on shoulders. A silence that felt like home. From the street outside, the scent of coffee drifted into the morning air. But inside, something stronger was brewing. The sun poured golden light across every table. The line stretched to the door, but no one seemed impatient. A student scribbled notes beside his latte. A construction worker wiped dust from his hands while scrolling his phone. Across from him, a woman in a blazer laughed into her caramel foam. No velvet ropes, no reserved signs, just people, different stories. One space. The hum of conversation mixed with the clink of ceramic mugs. Steam curled softly from the espresso machine. And behind the counter, an old wooden sign, cleaned and rehung with care. Its letters slightly faded but resolute. "Coffee is meant to be shared." A young couple paused to read it. "That's beautiful," one whispered. An older man near the window nodded to himself. Emma noticed. She didn't speak, she just smiled and moved on. The sign didn't announce a change. It reminded everyone of what had always been true. It wasn't just decoration. It was a promise. Next to the register now sat a small wooden box, a handwritten note taped to its front. "Pay it forward coffee. Buy one, gift one." Emma had started the program quietly. No banner, no PR campaign. Just a question at the bottom of the receipt. "Would you like to leave a cup for someone else?" The response was overwhelming. Over 500 cups gifted in a month. To students, to delivery drivers, to anyone who needed a sip of warmth and a moment of dignity. No forms, just kindness. One cup at a time. People began to leave notes with their receipts, thank yous, stories, hopes. And that's when the roast place became more than a cafe again. It became a chain of unseen hands passing love forward. The bell above the door rang softly. No one turned, until someone stepped in, shoulders hunched, jacket torn, eyes heavy with sleep and defeat. Victor, no suit, no bravado, just a man, broken down. He approached the counter with a whisper. "Can I get a black coffee?" Emma looked up. Time paused. There was no resentment, no triumph, only recognition and a choice. She reached behind her, poured a fresh cup, and placed it gently in front of him. Beside it, a warm roll. Wrapped in parchment. No charge, she said gently. Then, leaning forward just slightly, at this café, everyone deserves a chance to start again. Victor's lips parted, but he didn't speak. He simply took the cup, cradled it between both hands, and whispered a thank you. Then he sat near the window. Steam rose from the coffee like incense, and in that small, sacred moment, Grace returned. Not loud, not proud, just present. Jackson, sitting in the far corner, watched. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes shimmered, not with victory, but with something deeper, recognition. That justice doesn't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes, it's a quiet door left open for someone who has finally learned what the cold feels like. He leaned back, letting the sound of life fill his ears. A child giggled nearby. A spoon clinked gently in a cup, and in his heart, a thought formed, soft as breath. Justice isn't about revenge. It's giving someone the chance to learn how to be human again. And that was more than enough.